Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another Growing with God video. Today I'm going to be answering a question that I feel is very relevant to all of us, and that question is, what is the right way to communicate our problems to God? So I say this question is so important because prayer is something that all Christians do, or is something that all Christians should do, as we're advised to do it in the Bible by people like St. Paul in Philippians chapter 4 verse 6, where he said, "Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God." However, I'm making this video because I'm noticing that many people around are actually praying wrong. So I'm going to use this video to address how we should actually pray properly. And the first thing that is important if we want our prayers to be answered, if we want to pray properly, is to, make sure we are actually serving God. Because if we aren't serving God, then God may actually just ignore our request completely. Because the Bible tells us that the prayers of those who don't serve God are actually seen as an abomination in places like Proverbs chapter 28 verse 9. And it's even worse when these prayers are bought with evil intent, with an evil mind, as King Solomon noted in Proverbs chapter 21 verse 27, where he said there, "The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination. How much more when he bringeth it with a wicked mind?" And we see this exact same thing happening with King Saul in places like 1 Kings chapter 14 verse 37 and 28 verse 6, where we see that Saul's prayers were rejected because Saul was in sin. So making sure that we aren't in sin is incredibly important, but we also have to make sure that what we are asking is actually in line with God's will. And John the Apostle made this very clear, that God only answers the prayers that do not go against his will, in 1 John chapter 5 verse 14. And this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he heareth us. Now, what is God's purpose? It's that we are humble, just, and we obey him, as was made very clear in Micah chapter 6 verse 8. That is God's purpose for us. And then Matthew chapter 6 verse 9 and 10 describes God's overall desire for his will of a righteous will to prevail on heaven and on earth. And of course, if this righteous will is going to prevail, we also have to be righteous as well. So we should remember that God is a God of principle, and he's not going to go back on his word, as we see in Isaiah chapter 55 verse 1. So as much as we may desire material prosperity and pray to God for it, we must also be aware of God's desire to end the world and replace it with his righteous world, as was made clear in 1 John chapter 2 verse 17, which will really affect how prosperous we can actually be. And an example of a prayer that was actually rejected because it went against God's will was that prayer of Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 27 verse 46. Because even though he was the Son of God, his prayer still wasn't answered because God's will at that current time was that Jesus Christ would die for our sins. Now, if he didn't die like what he was asking here, the ransom sacrifice wouldn't have happened. So that's the point I'm trying to make here. But another thing that I think we should keep in mind is to make sure that our prayers aren't only motivated by lust, because James the Apostle had told us in James chapter 4 verse 3 that this may actually make God not to answer our prayer. He said here, "Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lust." Because God isn't really interested in just making all Christians the most materialistic and physically appealing people ever. Instead, he'll rather invest, or he's rather more interested in their spiritual well-being. And Matthew chapter 13 verse 22 makes it clear why. Because that very desire that is causing people to make prayers like these to God is the very thing that is killing their faith. He said in that, parable that this chokes the word because they're now focused on, being very prosperous. And plus, another thing we should also keep in mind is to not be too repetitive. Because Jesus Christ told us in Matthew chapter 6 verse 7, "But when ye pray, use not vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking." And then in Matthew chapter 6 verse 8, Jesus Christ told us why, and that it is because before we even pray, God already knows what we want. And then, a really practical example of how this works was shown in 1 Kings chapter 18, where Baal's prophets prayed all day and they weren't answered. But Elijah prayed for like 1 minute and he was answered, fire came down from heaven, and so on. So the length of our prayer or how many times we repeat our request does not matter. And finally, we shouldn't be impatient. Psalms chapter 27, verse 14 tells us that we should be able to wait on God. He said here, wait on the Lord, be of good courage, that he may strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Abraham had to wait till his old age to have a child. So we should be exercising this kind of faith and patience when you pray. Plus, we should also have space in our hearts to accept a no from God when it comes to personal requests that may not be central to God's will. But anyway, I think I can stop here on answering that question of what is the right way to bring our request to God. If you have enjoyed this video, learned anything, I would appreciate it. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also to hit the notification bell so you'll know when new Growing with God videos come out. Have a great day, and we will see you in the next video.